points and weak points, and not fooling yourself or turning a blind eye to your weaknesses. It's very easy to waste a lot of time and to become very frustrated, disappointed, putting effort into things which are really not suited to at all, and constantly overlooking and justifying weak points and faults, and trying to create situations and conditions where we don't have to face up to those things. That's why in monastic life, in the forest monasteries, monks have to spend like at least 5 years, like sort of apprenticeship, living in communities before they have the opportunity to go off on retreat by themselves, because there's so many things that it's difficult to learn in solitude that you can learn more easily in community. Similarly, there are a lot of things that you can learn in solitude that you can't learn so easily in community. But in community, you're constantly being confronted with people who have a different idea of who you are than you have. And some of these people are quite intelligent, usually in monastic communities, and quite sensitive and perceptive, so it's not easy to dismiss them in the same way. And it's a reason why young monks, start to pine for solitude often. It's difficult for monks because you have all these teachings about the joys of solitude, and it's sort of the ideal life of a monk. So something I teach my own students and monks in the monastery is that if you quarrel with other monks, don't think that you go off and live in solitude that it will be any better, because if you quarrel with other monks, you live by yourself, you'll quarrel with yourself. It's only if you can live at peace with other monks that you have necessary maturity to live alone. So there are lots of spiritual teachings which can be used to justify ourselves and to lie to ourselves, basically. And living in community is sometimes compared with living like a pebble on the seashore with a lot of other pebbles. The sea comes in, the sea comes out, the pebbles rub against each other, and over the course of time they become very smooth. Whereas rocks or pebbles on a mountaintop never get any kind of friction, and so they remain kind of ugly and jagged for a long time. So the living with others and living with people sort of rub you up the wrong way is not a bad thing in itself. If we're taking on this process of interest and wanting to understand oneself and to see the areas in which we attach and cling to things, and the lies that we tell ourselves, then living with others, with good friends and people who have similar spiritual ideals and people who we can trust is a great benefit. So knowing ourselves, knowing where we need to work, and being able to apply effort there in a very humble way. We can't in spiritual life take calendars very seriously. And people say, well, I've been doing this for weeks now, or months now, or even years now, and I don't see any movement, anything happening. Well, that's not necessarily true anyway. But even if it were, if we take a different time scale and think, well, perhaps you've been accumulating an unwholesome habit for, let's say, 1,000 lifetimes, what's 10 years? It depends on the time scale that you take. It's more a matter of saying, is something worth doing, and then saying, well, I'll just keep at it until I'm successful. I don't know if some of you may have read a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's one of my favourite writers, and he has a chapter in this book on the reasons why Asian kids tend to be better at maths than American kids or European kids. And one or two of the experiments that have been done is they gave children, one Japanese children, American children, maths problems which they knew were too difficult for them, and to see what happened. And the Japanese children tended to keep on at trying to work out the problem much longer, significantly longer than the American children. Then the second section, they gave them two further questions, one very similar to the first one, which they couldn't answer, and another one of a different type. Nearly all of the American children switched to the second kind of question, concluding that the first kind of question is too difficult, and try a second time question, whereas almost all the Japanese kids went for the question which was similar to the first one, which they couldn't answer, because, well, maybe that will give me an insight in how to work out this particular kind of problem. So a number of different kinds of tests came up with the overall conclusion that essentially it's the willingness to keep at something, to stick at something, not to give up, to be patient, which is the primary conditioning factor for success in this and in many other endeavors, almost all endeavors. So these are kind of very basic, everyday, mundane kinds of qualities that perhaps we don't give so much importance as we might. The sense of being willing to keep at something, and not keep looking at the clock or not looking at the calendar, and when you've decided there's something, it's worth doing, no matter how long it takes. Well, it takes as long as it takes, and we have no idea of what's happened in previous lives and what baggage we're bringing into this life. So we work with what we've got. The next quality is knowing the right amount. This phrase usually translated into English is moderation, but it's in Pali or in Thai it's Brahman, which is more a sense of just the right amount, the optimum, knowing what's the optimum amount. And this teaching particularly is applied to our relationship to the material world, to possessions, to money, and so on and so forth. So rather than this idea of the more the better, the sense that there's never enough, and saying, well, what's the right amount? What is the optimum amount? And again, we can see that the sense of you can only really reflect on and determine the optimum amount if you have this idea of the best, or the goal that you're moving towards or you aspire to. So in the Buddhist idiom, we'll say, okay, we're trying to move towards a sense of inner freedom, self-reliance, wisdom, compassion, kindness, inner peace, and so on. These are the goals that we're moving towards. So we'll say, well, how much money do we need? How much work do I need to do? What kind of work do I need to do? How many possessions do I need to do? Which is most conducive to the goals that I aspire to, or at the very least, which is least obstructive to them. Certainly often in family life, for sure, we have to make a number of compromises with the people around us who maybe don't have the same goals and ideals. But if we don't have that sense that this is as conducive as possible, then at least having the sense that it's as least obstructive as possible to the development of these spiritual goals that we aspire to. And again, using our wisdom faculty to reflect upon the nature of sensual desires, and not taking a kind of a Puritan or moralistic attitude to everyday enjoyments, but saying, well, what really do we get from them? Is it really as satisfying as we would like to think? One of the similes given by the Buddha is a similar one. It's like you've got an itch. He's saying an itch. In fact, he gives a very graphic example of someone with leprosy, but let's just take it on the level of someone with an itch. And you scratch an itch, and it's really nice. You scratch an itch, that feels good, no doubt about it. But the problem is that not very long afterwards, the itch comes back, and often the itch is worse than it was before because of the scratch. So you have scratching gives pleasure, but it is a cause for an intensification of the basic problem. And the Buddha is saying this is a model for the kind of sensual pleasures that we chase after in daily life, that we have a sense of lack, a sense of incompleteness, of loneliness, of tension, of something not quite right, which propels us towards various pleasures which do temporarily take away that feeling or take away that itch, but in the long term, in fact, make it even worse. And the Buddha is also pointing towards the law of diminishing returns, and that a certain level, certain amount of stimulation doesn't give the same amount of pleasure consistently. After a while, the amount of pleasure decreases through familiarity, through boredom or whatever. So you have to increase the stimulation, increase its intensity or its variety, and so you're on this constant kind of restless quest for some kind of cessation of the sense of lack, which is ultimately frustrating. So that's not an object of faith in Buddhism, but the Buddha's asking us to look at our experience of sensual pleasure and seeing the whole picture, and actually how wise, how successful is this as a means of dealing with our suffering in life. So for lay Buddhists, the Buddha gives the 5 precepts. He said, well, okay, it's perfectly all right to enjoy the pleasures of the senses if they're not leading to pain and suffering and inflicting pain and suffering on other people. So you have those kind of boundaries there. So it's perfectly all right to go to the movies and listen to music and all these kinds of things, but the Buddha would recommend to have at least 1 day a month or 2 days a month, perhaps 4 days a month on the one prat day, where you refrain from those things, just as a quiet day and a check, and to see to what extent you're getting attached to those things and what it's like to live without them just for a while.